On the mic. On the mic with your host Suleiman Al-Zahafi. Hi, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode, or I guess the beginning episode of the show On the Mic. You are joined with myself, Suleiman Al-Zahafi. We are joined today with a very interesting guest. This individual comes all the way from the United States, not just from the States, from the Lone Star State of Texas. We're going to be joined with Mr. Gregory Black. Hi, thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for joining us here on the mic. We're going to be discussing a very interesting perspective of individuals, or I say expats, coming to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. First of all, Mr. Gregory, tell us who you are and what do you do?
Well, again, as you said, I am from Texas. I'm actually in the food and beverage industry. I develop international restaurant brands throughout the GCC, primarily in Saudi Arabia.
Oh, wow. So it seems like you're not too far away from home, and yet you made this into a new home. Tell us, what made you want to come to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and how long you've been here?
Well, actually, as most people, it was a job offer. I came in 1995. That was the first time I came to Saudi Arabia. And so that's about 27 years.
Wow, 1995. Say
that again?
From 1995, you've been here.
Yes,
Wow.
1995.
And you said you came for work and everything. Like, what is something that you felt like attracted you to decide I want to come to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia?
Well, it was actually very simple because, I'm from Houston, Texas.
Yeah.
And as everybody knows, Houston is the oil and gas capital of the world. So it's not uncommon to have a lot of Arab friends. And, of course, with Saudi Aramco, they were, a lot of young students when I was in high school. And, of course, in college that came from places like Saudi Arabia.
Indeed. So you were kind of exposed to the Saudi culture already in Houston. So that kind of made you think or consider to come to Saudi Arabia.
Well, actually, it came up. It was like, wow, that'd be very interesting because I already had Saudi friends. And, of course, Saudi Aramco has a large office in the Houston market. So it was just, almost natural.
Okay. And when you start meeting Saudis in Houston, like, what was your impression of them, honestly? Like, what is it? Like, they love the food, they love being very hospitable. What was something that you realized about the Saudi community?
Well, a lot of people don't realize, but Saudi is very much like Texas in the fact that we're very hospitable. And that was one of the things that came across from the very beginning, even in high school. And they were always willing to ask you to visit and wanted you to come and share. So it was always an interesting culture to get to know. And then again, Texas being part of the Hispanic culture, it was also the same. So it, like I said, it was very natural.
Okay. So I guess you were already introduced to the Saudi cuisines in Houston.
Well, in those days, not so much. It was more of very little Mediterranean, Lebanese type food. But what I will tell you is that when I moved to the Middle East, I definitely fell in love with the food. And my family was here with me. And a lot of times we would be back in the United States visiting and wishing that we were still having some meals back here in this part of the world. And so it's because, the cuisine here is really good.
Yeah. Yeah, that is very true. And this, I think you realized once you came here, you kind of became a little more plump, as they say, like every individual I know coming from overseas, they realize the food here is good. It's so good that we overeat, which is, I think, is a compliment for the individuals in the kingdom.
Well, I always say I like good food.
That is true. For your individual, for your background, you're an individual that has like a cuisine and F&B and everything. How do you perceive the F&B here in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia back in the days in 1995 and 2005? And
Well, when I came in 1995, we were developing a brand called Fuddruckers,
okay,
and Fuddruckers was just back then a hamburger concept.
okay,
And then I started developing another brand called Chili's, and then it just went on from there. So back in the day, when I look at the market, the GCC market, I always knew that Saudi Arabia was going to be what I call the final frontier for the F&B market. First of all, it has the population. Secondly, it has good disposable income. And, there's quite a few expats here, expats from the Americas, Europe, and other parts of the world, of course. So I know that a lot of people hear about places like Dubai, for example, but I see that Saudi will be the final frontier as far as food and beverage goes. It's just such a large country, and we have the population.
okay. So I guess you had quite a surprise, and you were very intrigued in the very beginning. But what is one thing that surprised you the most? Something that you felt like our listeners at home definitely want to know.
Well, the one thing I always say is that you have to understand the culture and the people that you're dealing with in this part of the world. And again, I've been developing brands in all of the GCC countries. So, the one thing I will tell you is that once I understood how the Saudis think and react, and of course, back in the 90s, it was a different culture, and today it's completely changed. But what I also know is that actually, if you actually approach a Saudi and say hello, they'll definitely greet you back. And they're actually shy in a sense. They won't actually greet you first. But once you greet them, now you've engaged.
Okay, so you realize that, yani, I won't say they're introverts, but they're like a little shy in the beginning. It just takes a little time to warm up. Okay, and
Exactly.
for your individual, like you've been here since 1995. I feel like you got to experience the culture, especially with the changes happening, developments, especially the past 7 years. How do you see the change happening? Was it something that you expected? Was it something that was at a faster pace than you expected? What was your experience witnessing that?
Well, unfortunately, the changes that we have experienced were based on several deaths of kings. King Fahd died, and then King Abdullah became king, and then he died. And this came the regime for King Salman and MBS. And actually, I think what we're experiencing now would not have happened as quick as we have seen it if it wouldn't the fact that President Trump came to Saudi Arabia shortly after becoming president, and because of that, the world press came with him. And there was some positives and some negatives out of that trip, but I think this is something that made the king and MBS look at making decisions quicker than expected, cultural changes, a lot of things, and all of it's been very positive.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of people, individuals coming for the kingdom for the first time, they're quite amazed of all the changes happening and the rapid pace of the change. Obviously, you've witnessed it yourself. Many individuals, I'm sure, back home, they ask you like the changes that you're witnessing. Was it something that like everyone should give it a try? Because now tourism sector has opened up, and you're in the F&B, so they're kind of closely tied together. What advice, what recommendation would you like to give to individuals that never been to the kingdom?
Well, when I was offered this job back in probably 94, before we came in 95, I had the luxury of actually interviewing people who had experience in the Saudi market and also in the GCC. And I'm going to say exactly the same thing they told me. Go and try it, because if you don't like it, you can always come home. Well, 27 years later, I'm still here, so I guess I like it enough.
Yeah, that's very true. For individuals, I'm sure you have a lot of guests coming to the kingdom and everything. What's their impression now? I know they didn't get to experience it beforehand in the 95 and the 2005 in the previous years. What's their impression? I'm sure that you welcomed a lot of international expats coming to the kingdom.
Yes. So what I can tell you is because they didn't get to experience what it was before, they see something they would just consider it's normal.
Okay.
And that's what people see. They don't see the culture, from 10, 15 years ago under King Fahad. And, of course, things were changing even under King Abdullah. But obviously King Salman and MBS have really changed the culture here, but in a very positive way.
Okay. So pretty much it's something that they felt like it's something that normal because they didn't see the actual changes and shifts and developments happening. For individual, you've been here for 27 years, and I think you're going to be here for another many years. What do you do for fun, meanwhile, instead of working, instead of doing the F&B aspect?
Well, if we were to compare this to Dubai, for example, we're nowhere, where they are today. But the fact that we are, working in that direction as far as a culture and bringing things back to Saudi Arabia that were here over 30 years ago. So entertainment is coming in. We've already seen some of these very large sports events, and there's more coming. And I just see it, again, as an improvement in, your daily life. And, and it's just going to get better and better. And they're working very hard to provide a better quality of life for everybody that's in Saudi Arabia.
Indeed. So I guess that's kind of something interesting for individuals to be aware of. Any final message or advice or anything you would like to say to our dear listeners? Because I feel like you're one of the best individuals to kind of highlight your experience here, coming from Texas, coming from Houston, Texas, especially, and living. And I feel like you're very settled in the kingdom. What advice would you like to tell our dear listeners?
Well, what I would tell anybody is the same advice that I got before, and that was definitely come and to give it a try. People are just just amazed of what's going on in the Middle East anyway. There's a lot of good press, there's a lot of bad press, and I just tell people to come and experience it for themselves. And every time they do, they're always overwhelmed and amazed about what they see and experience.
Okay, that's very true. Anyway, Mr. Gregory, thank you so much for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure, and we're very excited for you to give us an insight of an individual coming from all the way from Texas into the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I feel like this is your second home, if I'm not mistaken. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, on the mic. I don't know what else to say, but I guess you're just like a foodie like me. You always like to try new cuisines and always try to meet new individuals here in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Thank you so much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Gregory Black, coming all the way from Houston, Texas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's today's episode with myself, Suleiman Al-Zahafi, for the program On the Mic. We're very excited for all the dear listeners to be joining in. Until further episodes of the program, thank you so much for joining. On the Mic. On the Mic with your host, Suleiman Al-Zahafi.